From the Film Files of SMW, The Oscars, Episode 3, Cinematography. Cinematography is a very new thing for me. I only started noticing it a couple of years ago when I saw The Grand Budapest Hotel in theaters. That film was honestly really groundbreaking for me because it changed the way that I experienced movies. I started to notice how much different shots could influence my reaction or enjoyment of a film. It renewed my appreciation for film as an art form, and great cinematography turns great movies into masterpieces. I'm still learning about cinematography, but it's quickly becoming one of my favorite aspects of film. So today I'm here to talk to you about the films nominated for Best Cinematography this year. Forgive me for any names that I pronounce wrong. I apologize. Roger Deakins for Blade Runner 2049, Bruno Del Bonnell for Darkest Hour, Hoyt van Hoytema for Dunkirk, Rachel Morrison for Mudbound, and Dan Lautzen for The Shape of Water. So, Blade Runner 2049. Probably one of the most, if not the most, visually interesting film I've ever seen. Every shot was breathtaking. Something that was really interesting is it reminded me of video games a lot of the time. The coloring in this movie was the biggest thing for me. The whole movie kind of had this like monochromatic feel as he traveled to different places. It was like each place, each location kind of focused in on a different color, which was really cool. Start out at this farm. It looks earthy, but it looks like it's a cold earth. It's like dry ground that's cracking a little bit. A couple of shots that I found really interesting here. When he's kind of interrogating the guy there, who by the way the whole time I was just like, it's Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy. Anyways, there was this one shot when they're talking in the kitchen that focuses on the pot that's steaming on the stove. And it does this for like a decent period of time and you can hear them talking, but the focus of the camera is on the pot. It kind of upped the importance of the scene by focusing on this pot instead of focusing on them. The city is really interesting. The whole city kind of has this haze around it and it's all very dark and gloomy. And then there's these huge neon holographic ads everywhere that basically act as light. I really like the shot where he's driving and you see the light from all the ads, the colors kind of going across his window and his face. Also the scene when they're on the roof, him and Joy. There's like a neon green light and a neon blue light and they're kind of like lighting each person and they're like coming together and like, it was a really pretty shot. Wallace headquarters was like the coolest place ever. I loved every scene in there. That color yellow is like really pretty and like had this eerie sereneness to it. It kind of makes you nervous. It's kind of an unnatural color, but it was pleasant. It was weird and I loved it. And also the lighting in this place was so cool. They utilized so much movement and lighting patterns. The light would like move as they walked. All their use of lighting in this film was so cool. Like all of the movement that they used, the patterns, their use of silhouette. Oh, this movie is just so pretty. When he goes to visit the girl who creates the memories, this place feels very white, both inside and outside. There's snow there, so everything outside of it is white. The ground's white, the sky's white, and there's snow coming down. The inside is completely like a white dome. Their use of color is very effective. It just changes the way you feel about the place that he's at. The yellow, you're like, it's calm, but it's an unnatural calm, so like, I like this, but I'm a little on edge. The white place, you feel very like, this is easy calm, this is safe calm. And then there's the red desert, which was just like so cool and like otherworldly, where Ryan Gosling's walking towards those big gray statue things that have kind of fallen down. You kind of see this like red sunset behind him and he's like silhouetted and it was just like so beautiful. It like took my breath away. One of my favorite shots in the whole film, honestly. It was just so cool to explore the different parts of this world through light and color. Every scene had something super visually interesting about it. I just want to look at this film all day. So next up we have The Darkest Hour. This movie definitely had a very period feel. It felt very fitting for the time. It had a very muted color palette. It was a lot of blacks and whites and grays and browns. The color palette really reflected this kind of industrial, political facing war atmosphere that the movie took place in. It doesn't draw any focus from the story or the characters, which is really important here because this story is so dialogue heavy. It's really dependent on the conversations that are being had, and the way that it's filmed has to serve those conversations. The camera movement is very focused on the characters. The camera moves when the character's moving, and it doesn't move when the character's not moving. There's not a lot of movement in the war scenes, which is really effective because it really makes you focus in on what they're saying. But then there are some really cool shots where they may be moving through a building and they go through a lot of different rooms and the camera's following them moving that are really visually interesting, and they wake you up a little bit. You know, this movie can feel a little bit slow at times. There are also some really cool shots in this from Churchill's perspective. So there were like 2 scenes where he's driving and the camera kind of pans down the street looking at all the people, and then you see him in the car. These shots were really interesting. They were almost kind of in slow motion, and I think they kind of offer glimpses into Winston's mind, and especially like the second time it happens when he then gets out of the car and joins these people that he's just been watching. There's also a scene when he's in a plane and it's the same shot except it's from above, and then you kind of see this little boy like look up, and there's this cool shot of him like looking at the airplane through his hand, and then he closes his hand and fades to black. That was a cool transition. And there were also a lot of kind of like aerial, like drone type shots where you started in close with somebody and then would like zoom out really far. There was a really stunning shot where he first arrives at Buckingham Palace to meet the king, and he gets out of the car and you see Buckingham Fountain behind them. It's just like this quick little shot, but it's really pretty. I thought it was really interesting that when we're first introduced to Winston Churchill, he's in complete darkness. In an interview with Bruno Del Bonnell, he said that he used lighting as a representation of how liked Winston Churchill was. So in the beginning, he is shadowed in darkness because he's unliked. No one really likes him. And then at the end, he's drenched in light because he has earned the people's affection. I thought that was very cool. I liked that use of light as symbolism. Next up is Dunkirk. This movie really offers you a new perspective of war. The biggest thing that makes this movie so cool and so interesting is that it puts you in it. It allows you to experience the events with the characters. Hoyt van Hoytema does an amazing job at accomplishing this through the cinematography in this film. It really focuses on the people rather than the action. For example, like this scene where they're carrying the man on the stretcher through the crowds of people to like get onto the boat, and the camera is just running after them, running through these people, and it puts you in it, like you are running through the crowd, you're pushing through these crowds. There's a really big focus on perspective in this film. You never see the face of the enemy. There's like this idea of the enemy and this threat everywhere around you, and there's fear, but the enemy remains this kind of unseen idea. It's just one of those movies where you watch it and you can tell how much thought and work went into it. It's clear that just every shot, every angle has a purpose. Definitely a really visually interesting movie, especially for a war film, because it's presented so differently than most war films. But at the same time, it's almost a more effective depiction of war. It becomes so intimate and so personal. And a lot of that has to do with the way that it's shot. So next up is Mudbound. This nomination is really exciting because it's the first ever nomination for a female director of photography. It's about time. The color in this film was very understated, kind of muted or like pastel-y. It still like had a rich quality to it. It was like an understated vibrance. I don't really know how to explain it, but it was really interesting. The coloring almost felt kind of muddy, fittingly, and it was rich in the way that the colors of mud or the colors of the earth can be rich. There's a slight coloring difference between scenes that were shot in the McCallan's household and scenes that were shot in the Jackson household, which becomes really important when examining the differences in the way that they live. The Jackson household has a lot of very warm, earthy tones. McCallan's household feels more modern, I guess. Like, it feels more technological. It's like the difference between the way sun lights a room and the way electricity lights a room. With the Jacksons, it was very much a sunlight, and with the McCallans, it was very much an electrical light. And I feel like this almost also echoes the personalities of each family. And the McCallans maybe are a little bit colder. Jacksons are warmer. The film as a whole looks kind of aged, like it feels old-fashioned. When I was reading about this film, I came across something that was really interesting, a specific technique that Morrison used. She used older glass to soften the edges of the frame. Her goal with this was to shoot a film that was reminiscent of old photography, which I thought was really cool. That's a really cool idea. A couple of specific shots that really jumped out at me. The shot where Carey Mulligan is showering in the stall outside and the sun is setting. That whole shot is so beautiful, and it conveys a lot of emotion in it, which will make sense in the context of the film. Spoiler alert. The shot where the Jackson family finds Ronzel after he's been beaten and tortured and he's suspended in the air is heart-wrenchingly beautiful. I don't even have words for that shot, but it was very effective. Last up is The Shape of Water. The visual aspects of this movie are really interesting and really important. The cinematography in this movie really sets up the juxtaposition and the contrast between Eliza's world and everyone else's world. So in Eliza's world, you see a lot of aqua-based coloring, but it's warm tones still. There's a whimsy to it. It has a very old Hollywood glamour, and it always feels light. It feels like you're floating, like the camera's floating. And then you have the contrast of the real world, specifically even the villain's world. These scenes feel much more industrial. The color palette is much more steely. It's got a much harder look to it. It feels heavier. I read in an interview with Louston that the original idea was to shoot this movie in black and white. I actually feel like this movie could be really great in black and white. At the end of the day, Del Toro kept talking about color concepts, and the color became too important. And I can definitely see that because it is really important, especially in defining the two worlds. Loudson also mentioned the idea of watercolor being kind of the visual inspiration. I can definitely see that in the movie. This movie really reminded me of artwork. Another cool tidbit from that interview, there weren't any color touch-ups in post-production, so what you see is what it looked like on set. This movie is definitely visually magical. Cinematography is just really important to creating the atmosphere of the film. Alright, so it's time to reveal my pick for best cinematography this year. I think I just gotta give it to Blade Runner. It really was just one of the most visually interesting and amazing movies I've ever seen. Blade Runner 2049 for Best Cinematography 2018. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Until next time, bye.